At the IMF spring meeting, the managing director called that we are dealing with a three-speed global recovery, where Europe was facing a recession, where emerging markets are forecast to grow by 5%, and the US by 2%. So in order to get a better understanding of this scenario, we are pleased to have with us as a first speaker, Thomas Elbling, who is the division chief of the World Economic Outlook, the flagship publication of the IMF, to ask him what is the state of the global economy, what happened with the global imbalances, are we seeing the global imbalances disappearing, what was the variable of adjustment, and also to bring us maybe some medium-term perspective, not only about short-term scenario, but seeing that, what can be the best scenario in order to go back to a more sustainable growth. Thomas, I give you the floor for 15 minutes.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let me try to be, sorry. Okay, the title of our April 2013 World Economic Outlook is Hopes, Realities, and Risk. Now, the hope, of course, is that we finally leave the crisis behind us. And what you see here on this chart is the experience with what happens in the aftermath of financial crisis. So the hope is that after experiencing what is typically the permanent damage to output after a financial crisis, that you move through the healing, through the recovery period, and re-embark on growth. That's the hope. The reality is that this process is ongoing. Some countries have succeeded or seem to be on the way. In some countries, much more healing, much more repair needs to be done. And then other countries yet are doing well, are growing very strongly, and the medium-term outlook is promising. And this divergence between weak countries where repair is still very much needed, where growing out of the crisis is not yet quite done, countries where growing out of the crisis seems to have succeeded and a stable recovery seems to be there, and then the countries are doing well. That's the famous three-speed recovery. The prominence given to risks in the title just points to the fact that we still see significant downside risks to global prospects, and I will elaborate on that in a minute. Now, in the current state of the global economy is one of contrast, in the sense, in many ways, the world economy looks better. In particular, there's a sense that the extreme tail risks, the extreme concerns of last year, a possible breakup or a possible very strong intensification of the euro area crisis and sort of the fiscal cliff, that these two extreme risks to financial stability and global growth have been addressed. In Europe, there was after the ECB said we do what it takes, introduced the OMT, outright monetary transactions. The ESM was put in place, sort of a crisis resolution framework, with at least in its sort of basic outline was put in place. The fiscal cliff was avoided, and so financial markets have recovered. What you see here on the left side are equity markets, which after reaching a trough in the mid of last year have since recovered strongly, continue to perform strongly. On the right-hand side, you see sovereign bond spreads for the euro area, and what you see is that for euro area periphery, bond spreads have come down. In fact, we still are in a situation where prices of risky assets are rallying, and risk spreads for the euro area periphery, but also for other risky assets have come down to levels seen last in 2010, or some risky spreads outside the euro area are almost back to pre-crisis levels. The contrast, though, is that on the real side, the growth is still weak, in a sense. In our current forecast, we don't see much better growth in 2013. than we saw in 2012, around 3.25%. The recovery will only come in our forecast in the second half of 2013 and then more definitely in 2014, but still looking to past standards of global growth, it will be on the weaker side. And to understand the weakness or this divergence between financial market, improving financial market conditions, some confidence, some more optimism, and still relatively weak real economic developments, we have to look at developments by region. And here you just see our forecast, you see the three-speed recovery, and what is very clear is that the weakest spot at the moment in the global economy, in the bigger picture, among the major economies, is clearly the euro area. And the problems of the euro area are multifold, they have been discussed. I'm sure, I think one big problem at the moment, and that is that the improvement in financial conditions, which is primarily at the level of the sovereigns, doesn't pass through to households and firms. And it hasn't been fully passed on to banks. Banking sector risks have been reduced through ECB intervention. Official funding is there. On the other hand, spreads on bank bonds typically throughout much of the euro area are still quite high, so that bank financing costs are high, and the interaction between still significant funding costs and, on the other hand, weak near-term prospects that raise the riskiness of bank assets have led to hesitancy of banks to lend, and lending rates remain very high in the euro area. So in that sense, the monetary transmission mechanism impaired, and all the policy support doesn't quite help. Add to that then that the financial conditions are still tight in an environment where many households and firms suffer from a debt overhang. This, of course, is quite difficult. And this explains some of the continued weakness in the euro area ahead. Still, in our forecast, we think that some of these breaks will slowly ease. On the one hand, we have the fiscal adjustment, which will ease in the sense there will be continued fiscal consolidation, but it will be relatively less, so that the drag on growth will start to weaken. And then we still think, as economic prospects elsewhere improve, that also the euro area will benefit from some external stimulus, and that will help the recovery. That is, will help together if, and that is the big if, with continued policy support and structural reforms to address the remaining areas of weakness, including banking sector repair and balance sheet repair more broadly in the private sector, that the euro area should grow out slowly of the contraction and start moving back to growth. As you can see in this chart on the left side, the return to growth will only be in late 2013, and still through 2014 growth is expected to remain relatively weak if we look compared to other advanced economies. On the US then, this just highlights the tightness of funding conditions. In the United States, though, the situation is different. Balance sheet repair, banking sector healing, banking sector repair has progressed. The housing market has turned around, and so private sector demand has picked up. So if you want the handover from public or stimulus-driven growth to more private-driven growth is in train. On the other hand, what we see now in the United States, and that's illustrated in this picture, we have a much stronger drag from fiscal adjustment this year and perhaps next year. So while we expect private sector demand to grow at close to 3% this year in 2013, overall growth, figuring in the government, will be closer to 2%. Also in many other advanced economies, including in Japan, growth will be improving in 2013. Then turning to the strong point in the global economy, emerging markets, emerging market and developing economies, what the right chart shows is that all the talk about crisis doesn't really apply to these economies. If we look, they have, in historical comparison, we experienced the strongest recovery after a crisis. Now, clearly, emerging markets have problems of their own. While we expect growth to be resilient and strong, they nevertheless are facing a number of difficulties. One is that with weakness in advanced economies, much of the growth has been homegrown. So in particular, relatively easy macroeconomic policies have supported growth against advanced economy sector weakness, but this may carry problems of its own. On the one hand, credit has been growing very rapidly to some extent, even at a pace that's worrying. Asset valuations are relatively rich in many sectors, in many economies. You have the reinforcement from easy global financing conditions, strong capital inflows, which also can something to more than is good. On the other hand, you also have seen that after 10 years of a strong boom, strong growth in emerging market economies, we see some bottlenecks on the supply side, on the infrastructure side, on the labor market side. So overall, we have expected some slowdown in potential growth, and that's what you see on the right-hand side of the chart, that overall growth will remain strong, but a bit weaker than expected. So overall, in our forecast, we see an economy that is continuing at 3 speed, and the convergence to full speed, that is, economies growing at potential, that is sustainable trend growth over the medium, is something that will occur over the medium, over the next 2 to 3 years. Against this background, and since the weakness is concentrated in some of the major economies in some of the major economies of the world, we remain concerned about large downside risks. And turning to the risks, this is just a recap. So turning to risks, there are short-term risks and there are medium-term risks. In the short term, there are 2 concerns. One is that in the euro area, where we expect a recovery, is that the policy reforms, the implementation of policy adjustment and reform programs needed to support the return to growth, that policy implementation may be lagging or failing. This adjustment fatigue has been a word that made the rounds during the spring meetings of the IMF. There are concerns that the political cost of some of the adjustment programs will be high and will lead to political fragmentation, so that the broad support for these reforms may be missing. On the other hand, there are also short-term risks to US fiscal policy. There can be too much fiscal adjustment. Political fragmentation has made agreement on a sort of a pace of fiscal consolidation that would be acceptable from, or would be appropriate from a macroeconomic perspective of stable growth, may be difficult to achieve. There may also be, again, difficulties with raising the debt ceiling. But more generally, we also see medium-term risks. And the medium-term risks are multifold. In the euro area, still the concern is about adjustment fatigue, not just in the short term, but also in the medium term. Couple this with potentially much more difficult than expected process of banking sector reform and balance sheet healing, the lack of policy action. So the one concern is medium-term stagnation in the euro area rather than return to potential. Another concern is about fiscal consolidation. While we think there is in a number of economies, including the United States, too much fiscal adjustment for the moment, in the sense that to support growth there should be slightly less, it's clear that in the medium term, the debt burden in a number of economies, including Japan and the United States, is not sustainable, and medium-term fiscal consolidation needs to proceed. The issue here is that credible medium-term fiscal consolidation plans that address some of the basic issues, including higher expenditure from aging, have not yet been done. Then finally, for emerging market economies are sort of the combination of risk of slowing potential growth and very exuberant financial markets, so that we can have potentially asset overvaluation, capital flow reversals, and the like. In terms of policies, it's clear. I think in the short term, we still need to support growth in the advanced economies. So accommodative monetary policy, fiscal policy that's appropriately paced, and more importantly also the structural reforms needed to do the banking sector healing, banking sector repair, and then finally also the structural reforms to support growth in the labor markets, in product markets, through more competition. In emerging markets, there are two things that are important at the moment. On the one hand, manage the risks of potential financial excesses. This would mean basically two things: rebuilding policy buffers, probably recalibrate macroeconomic policies as the global economy will strengthen a bit in 2013 and then even more so in 2014. Have the appropriate macroprudential policies in place, and then finally also structural reforms to address some of the structural bottlenecks that have become manifest in these economies over the past 2 to 3 years. Let me stop here and give back to you, Mark. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I might want to revert to you later on to ask you about the prospect about China, you know, as it might have an important impact for the rest of the world, and how your reactions and your comments about the recent experimentation in Japan with Japan monetary policies and the spillovers, as this issue of spillover has been quite important in our conference yesterday and today. You know, the spillover effect of quantitative easing in the US and Japan and what it means for the emerging market. People have been talking more about negative spillovers here by the concern about, you know, this liquidity going more to asset market and can create bubbles, but also we might have also on the other side, you know, positive spillovers. If the US can grow to 3%, it would have an important impact for the emerging markets. Let's continue our conversation with former President of Poland, Mr. Aleksander Kwaśniewski. We'll give you the floor for 15 minutes. Please, thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Well, I'm not a specialist of economy or finances. My analysis will be much more political one. And of course, I would like to focus my attention on the situation in Europe, European Union, and this part of the world. Of course, you should know that judgments from Polish side are maybe too much optimistic, because the situation of my country is quite good, even during the crisis. Last year we finished with the growth of GDP on the level 2.3%. This year is, of course, not so good, but still that is 1 point something. If you compare Poland with other EU countries, our situation is not so dramatic. But generally speaking, I would like, or I understand that then we will have a chance to answer the questions, and maybe that is better in such interactive form to give you some remarks. But I would like to share with you with some general opinion now. The first, I remember our meeting last year. It was one of the most important questions: what will happen in the European Union if European Union survive? If euro as European currency will survive, and today the answers are quite simple. Of course, European Union as an integrated entity will survive, and of course Eurozone, after very dramatic and very painful experiences with Greece, Cyprus, Portugal, will survive also, and that is quite obvious. But of course the situation is not so easy, because we have still the crisis, and the crisis can give us very negative consequences. The main is the situation on the social situation of the countries. We have increasing unemployment in the majority of EU countries, especially this unemployment is among young people. In some countries like Spain, that is almost 40 and even more as 40%. And that is a real dangerous source of unrest, of problems next years. Of course, we have a lot to do with finances. I will speak a little bit about it. But generally speaking, mostly I'm afraid about the social consequences of the crisis, first, and the second, of political consequences of the crisis. Because in fact, in European politics, we have today such alternative. What to do in this new world, in this new architecture of the world of 21st century. Because we know quite well that today, the time of 20th century, the time of Cold War, the time of the leading role of the United States and the important role of European countries is finished. We have new centers of gravity, we have new centers of economy, politics, civilization development. It's China, it's India, it's Latin America with Brazil, it's Africa more and more, and it's necessary to accept, and that is a main thing for us in Europe, to accept this new architecture of the world, which means multipolar world, the world with many centers. And of course, for us Europeans, this dilemma is what we want to do in this new world. What should be the position of Europe and the European Union? And we have two possibilities. One is to be one of the most important players, and it means that we have to continue our integration, and even we have to make this integration deeper and more coherent. It means also that we have to continue enlargement of our integration in Europe. So simply speaking, or briefly speaking, it means that we need more Europe, not less Europe, more integration, not less integration, and that is one approach to this problem. And the second approach, and I'm very against such thinking, but is existing in Europe also, is that only the chance for us is to go back to the national state, and it means renationalization of European policies, and it means, at the end of the day, that European egoism will be more important, and this thinking about the future of and the new role of Europe in the new architecture of the world. But I'm quite optimistic about this, how we will solve this dilemma in Europe, because in my opinion still majority of European public opinion is in favor of this active role of Europe. They want to be player in the world and the global politics, and they are not ready to accept such decreasing conservative role of Europe in the future. If you would ask me about the ratio, how many Europeans are in favor of this active role of Europe, I'm sure that is still more as 50%, that is 55, maybe 60%. In Poland, this is enormous high number of supporters of European Union, that is something around 80%. But of course it's necessary to know that 30%, 35% are not interested about further integration or deeper integration of the European Union, and they are against that, and it means that that is a source of some egoism, selfishness, European selfishness, which was so dangerous in the past and can be quite dangerous again. But I'm sure that we have the chance, Europe will survive, and the short-term task, the short-term goal for us is to overcome the crisis, because the crisis with all these negative consequences can create a lot of tensions and a lot of instability. And the second long-term goal for European Union is to continue integration, to strengthen European institutions, to organize and to define more European policies, common European policies, and what is the most unpopular idea, to continue enlargement, especially enlargement towards such important countries as Turkey and Ukraine, but of course to Balkans also. That is my message number one. The message number two is concerning euro. You heard better specialists about Eurozone, but I'm sure that because we need deeper integration in Europe, so we need also our currency. And I'm sure that euro is, after all these difficulties which we observed last years, and after necessary decisions which were taken last year also, or last month, has a chance to continue its important role, and even more, I'm sure that after the crisis, Eurozone will be bigger. I can tell you that Poland is extremely interested to be part of Eurozone. Of course, it's difficult to predict when it can happen, because we need at least 3 criteria to fulfill. The first, the end of Eurozone crisis. The second, Poland should fulfill the Maastricht criteria. We are very close to that, but still we are not 100% ready to this. And thirdly, of course, this is a political decision from Polish side, and I think politically before election 2015 it would be impossible. So realistically speaking, 2016-17 is a time when Poland can join Eurozone, and it means the real very important political fact and real strength of Eurozone. Of course, the next, and I think if you here in Kazakhstan you are looking for scenarios for the next decades, I think it's important to understand that Eurozone will be the part of these scenarios, and Euro as a reserve currency of the world will continue its role. The next point is, of course, how to overcome the crisis, and what is the main dilemma for Europeans today is, of course, how to find the balance between 2 necessary things which we should do. The first is fiscal discipline. It means austerities, very unpopular, of course, and secondly is a problem of growth. Last month we had a very tough debate between Germany and France, the leading forces of European Union, because French approach is much more pro-growth, the German approach is much more pro-fiscal discipline and austerities. But I'm sure that the best solution for Europe and European Union is to find balance, because of course we need more discipline, and everything what happened with Eurozone during this crisis with banking system shows very strongly that we need more discipline. We need more disciplined budgets, we need less public debt, etc., etc. But I think this French approach has a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense, because even if we can imagine that one day all 27 or 28 soon with Croatia countries of European Union will have zero deficit, will have totally disciplined finances, it doesn't mean that Europe or European Union will have a growth. So I think this question how to support the growth of our economies, how to support growth of European Union is extremely legitimate, and is really the good question, the most important question for next months, how to find this equilibrium, this balance between austerities and growth. Of course, I don't expect nothing special, nothing revolutionary before 22nd of September this year, and I tell you why this date is so concrete, because 22nd of September is a date of German election. And of course, before German election, it would be naive to think that Germany will change this own approach, very much pro-fiscal discipline. But after the election, I expect some more flexibility from German side. I don't speak about results of German election, but I think that is really time to take decisions and to take necessary measures for growth, because recession, long-term recession for Europe and European Union would be dangerous and would create social tensions, and the social tensions can create more renationalization of domestic politics of European Union, and this ratio between pro-European voters and anti-European voters can change, and it would be extremely damaging for the future of European Union. The message, the question number 4 is, of course, how we can imagine the future of Europe, because especially this question is very important for Poland. We were asked many times if we are ready to accept Europe of two speeds. The Europe which has different parts of or different quality of integration. And of course, politically, our answer was very clear. Well, we are against because we want to see really integrated Europe, etc. But we are in such conference, and I'm former president, so I can tell you quite openly, of course, that it is necessary to accept Europe of two speeds. It's necessary to accept and even that is nothing unique, that is nothing special, and then not sensational. Because if you know the history of the European Union from the very beginning, it was a Europe with two leading forces, Germany and France, and then others. Today we have a bigger Europe, 28 countries, and in my opinion, even formally today we have two groups of countries. We have members of Eurozone and we have non-members of Eurozone. It means that we have two groups, not totally different, but with some different tasks and different responsibility. In the future, I think we can imagine even the Europe of three groups. The first is Eurozone, and of course this Eurozone will enlarge, at least by Poland, but I think by more countries. I think the majority of European members of the European Union will be the part of Eurozone. The second is the group which still will be not prepared, not ready to be the part of Eurozone, but will be the part of other common European programs like Schengen or treaties like Schengen, etc. And of course we'll have special countries with special statutes like United Kingdom, because I'm sure that United Kingdom finally will not decide to withdraw from European Union, but of course it will be not fully integrated. Maybe the question of UK is good for this next part of our meeting, but my message to you is don't afraid this Europe of many of two or three speeds, because still it will be politically Europe integrated. It will be still the one market, and more important, this Europe can be really the partner for emerging markets, for Kazakhstan as a construction, as a common construction of European Union. Of course, speaking about Europe of many speeds, it's necessary to say that we have some new situation in Europe, because long time, what I mentioned, Europe was led by this special relationships and special role of two countries, France and Germany. And today we have a little bit new situation, because the role of France, because of many reasons, also the lack of necessary reforms and own domestic problems decreased, but the role of Germany increased very much. And in fact, today, especially after unification of Germany, Germany is the most populated country in Europe, but economically and politically, Germany plays the leading role. And of course, for us, historically, that is would be the problem, but I absolutely agree with these Polish politicians which are speaking that today for Europe is not a problem of German hegemony. Today the problem could be with German lack of activity, or the problem if Germany would be not ready to take this responsibility for future of European Union and European integration, which is not, of course, one country story. This is a question of all of us, but with really such decisive, important role of Germany, which should understand that is a good future of European Union is very much in the interest of Germany, but it means a lot of responsibility, and it means that sometimes, like in the case of Greece, it's necessary to pay some bills and to pay some and to contribute very specially to this projects or anti-crisis measures. Of course, Germany cannot be alone. Germany needs strong partners in European Union, and I think still France is the most likely and needed partner for the future development in European Union. But I think Europe has a chance to find new engines, let's say, or new forces which can support European integration. They can encourage Europeans for next steps. And in my opinion, two countries among others are especially predestinated to that. Poland is one of them, because it's a 40 million people, very strategic geographic location, not bad economy now. The second is Sweden, I think the very leading country in the Northern Europe, with fantastic results of economy, very stable politics, etc. So I think that this typical axis, German, French, can have additional support from this side, new members of European Union, especially from Poland and northern part of Europe, Sweden, and it can create this new driving force for European integration and for European development in next decades. Well, in conclusion, I would like to say again, European Union has such dilemma in front of us. If we want to be strong player in this new world of 21st century, it's necessary to overcome the crisis, and it's necessary to continue our integration, and it's important to keep the door open for new members of European Union, like Turkey or Ukraine. Or we are ready to accept such falling role of Europe with all our values, with all our heritage, what is, of course, not very interesting perspective, not only for me personally, but especially for young generation of Europeans, because they want to be part of this changing world of new century. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for this very insightful political reading about the future of Europe. Before I open the floor for discussions, let me ask the organizer, are we expecting the two other speakers from the panel, or they are missing in action? No, Shen.
We are contacting them. We will have an information in 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
So why don't we open the floor for discussions? I think we have here two excellent presentations. One was really about the global economy, prospect, different scenario. And I ask Thomas maybe to come back about, China and also the issue of spillovers. And we have a political reading about the future of Europe. I may ask President maybe one question to start about Europe. Europe has always been driven by project. We have the single market, we have the euro and the roadmap for the euro, and we have the enlargement. So what is the next step for Europe? You believe that we can go to a political union? We have been talking about banking union, fiscal union, but at the end there is this modeling through scenario that people always talk. Well, we are going to go to a decade of adjustment, modeling through, but you are providing a positive and very optimistic perspective about Europe. And I think maybe we need countries like Poland who can maybe put pressure to France and Germany, and maybe to reconcile, Germany and France. Remember when Germany decided to adopt the euro and to pulling up and to giving up monetary sovereignty, they wanted assurance from the rest of the European countries, and they created the Stability and Growth Pact. But they felt maybe betrayed by the fact that countries didn't fulfill their commitment with the Stability Pact. So what will be the scenario, the quid pro quo, in order to reconcile, I think, the view of Germany, which is about discipline, responsibilities, and the rest of Europe who wants common liabilities? So we can get back to...
Well, that's a very interesting question. Thank you very much. But the answer is not so easy, because we have two elements. You mentioned very correctly that Europe was driven by great ideas. The first great idea was how to overcome the results and the consequences of the two world wars. Because the idea of European integration, of European Union, was a project, political project, proposed for Europeans after two wars, when we lost dozens of millions of people. Then, the main authors of European integration were old enemies, Because World War I, that was war, in fact, between Germany and France. World War II, it was also France and Germany were in different positions. You know, I will not speak about the history because it's enough complicated, but it was a great idea how to overcome these results, tragic results of the war, and how to create the space of peace, of cooperation, of free market, and, what is extremely important to underline, of reconciliation. And this reconciliation of the people, reconciliation of the nations, reconciliation of all of us happened. Today, you know, if I'm working very much for reconciliation between Poland and the other countries, Ukraine, because of complicated history, but I'm involved as the chairman of European Council of Tolerance and Reconciliation. If we want to show very positive example of reconciliation, this is French-German reconciliation. Unbelievable what happened. And that is not very long time. That is only some decades. So you're right that these driven forces of European thinking, of these European ideas was how to overcome the wars, how to organize common markets, how to reconcile the people, how to have one currency, euro, and how to enlarge after Cold War European Union. And it was a great days for post-communist countries like Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and others to be finally in the same family, in the same club of European nations and European countries. And today is a good question how we want, and that is a very general idea, what we want to do now. And my answer is we have to say that we Europeans want to fight to be on the podium of in the global competition of 21st century. Even if we have to accept very unpleasant information that gold and silver medal are occupied by two strongest forces in the world, United States and China, and we don't know which one will be number one and which one will be number two, but maybe gold and silver are not for us Europeans, but still the bronze medal is available. Still we can fight for this position in the world, and I think this understanding that the world changed and we have to show that Europe still is something in this new global architecture that can be animating project, can be animating, especially for young generation, because that is progressive, that is not defensive concept. Of course, the good question is if Europe has enough arguments to fight for this bronze medal, and in my opinion, yes. Because look, European Union that is now more or less 500 million people, there's a huge market and a huge potential. That is with Ukraine and Turkey, it would be much more as 600 million, almost twice as United States. The economy together is one of the biggest. The potential of science, potential of research, potential of education, potential of university is huge. We have a lot of elements which, in my opinion, will be very important for emerging countries, because we can criticize our social policy, we can criticize our labor law, position of trade unions, but everything will come to China. All these problems will come to emerging markets. You cannot say that one day nobody in your countries will speak about labor unions, social policy, position of women, the question of dignity of working people. You know, everything you will have here also, because this is not European idea. That is a question of development of civilization and human beings. But this is a different story. So I think still Europe has a lot of arguments. And last point, we have some real weaknesses. But the weaknesses and the problems are not on this, in this general perspective. They are the problems which we can politically solve. Because this is a problem of fiscal discipline, this is the problem of growth, this is the problem how to change our European institution to be more effective, to spend not so much time and even to waste so much time for some decisions. But this is everything possible to do. I think if we, because maybe I'm speaking too long, but if we remember discussion between Germany and France after Hollande, the very beginning of this debate, the difference was huge, because Germany was very much against all this liberalization of fiscal policy. They said, first of all, discipline, and France said, no, no, growth. Now we know that that is something what we have to do parallel, because the case of Cyprus, the case of Greece showed that we cannot be so naive to introduce new ideas without system of control, without instruments will help us to control the situation. But of course, I'm sure that the Germany after the election, I think not so much will change in Germany, that is my prediction, after the election, will understand very well that recession can be as much dangerous for Europe as a lack of fiscal discipline and the problems in Eurozone. Because the Eurozone, the problems of Eurozone, what was possible to resolve in this quite, maybe too long, but still visible period of time. If we will have a long-term recession, we cannot be sure when we can finish this period and what kind of consequences we can observe. Because frankly speaking, still we are very happy, we are very lucky with this crisis. Because normally the consequences of the crisis, if you know the history, were very dramatic. We had wars, we had revolutions, we had inflation, and now we have no war, no revolution, no inflation, we have a crisis. And it means that the situation is still possible to control and to change. And last point, you know, the main idea of this world order during Cold War was the equilibrium of fears, of threats, because America had a nuclear weapon and Soviet Union had a nuclear weapon, and everybody was so afraid that this balance existed quite a long time. Today, thanks God, and especially from Polish perspective, we are extremely happy that the Cold War is finished and we are independent, sovereign country, but this balance of threats, of nuclear threats, is finished. And what is a new balance, how we can define new balance in the world now? In my opinion, that is a balance of interdependence. We are so interconnected that, in fact, we are interested not to overcome the problems even in the smallest region of the world. We are not interested to see the problems in European Union, to see the long-term crisis in the United States, to see some instability in China, etc., etc. So this new balance, this new equilibrium of interdependence, I think that is our chance, and that can give us the feeling that together really we can overcome even some such complicated situation as crisis now.
Thank you. Before maybe I open the floor for discussion, Thomas, can I get back to you? You mentioned, Mr. President, China, and that at one point in time, China will also need to start thinking about creating a social safety net. 1 year ago, the former Vice Premier of China was concerned about the unbalanced growth in China and also unsustainable growth. So are we seeing a rebalancing in China, moving away from export, domestic growth toward more domestic-led growth, Thomas? As we're talking about the prospect and forecast for China economy, are we starting to see a rebalancing happening?
As far as China and rebalancing is concerned, I think a first step towards rebalancing has been taken. I think if we look at China over the past few years since the crisis, growth has been much more driven by domestic demand. So if you want, the current account surplus, which peaked, I think, close to 10% of GDP in 2006, 2007, is now down to 2.5%. That is partly cyclical, but it's because it reflected in part the extraordinary domestic policy measures to turn around the economy and keep strong growth. But there are other factors as well. Now, but the rebalancing is not complete. I think there's still, growth is unbalanced. It remains very much investment driven. So at the moment, investment ratios of close to 50%, right? I think there comes to a point where there's too much investment and not enough consumption, and where rebalancing from investment to consumption can actually lead to, at the same time, say, slightly lower growth, but higher welfare for households, for consumers, which is the ultimate metric for well-being. And there, in terms of getting that rebalancing, it's clear that it cannot be done with macroeconomic policies. It also needs structural policies. And clearly, one of the key points there is a social safety net. At the moment, household saving is very high in China. There's very strong saving for precautionary motives, also to have savings as a form of insurance against healthcare risk, and so on and so forth. And the other factor is financial underdevelopment, in the sense that at the moment, household finance is underdeveloped. Everything in the financial system, in terms of incentives for financing, is geared towards investment. And if you want to have stronger consumption, you also need, to offer households better opportunities for saving, better yields, and at the same time have better access to credit. Now, these structural reforms, social safety nets, financial deepening, the experiences that takes years. In our forecast, we assume that Chinese authorities will continue with some of the steps they have outlined and will achieve results, but it will be a relatively slow process.
Okay, why don't we open the floor for discussions? Maximiliano, please.
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the European tour. Two questions, which is something that always surprised me. Overall, this European euro crisis, what always surprised me was the resilience of the euro. I mean, when there were really talks of a breakup to the euro, you would imagine that people, investors, would run away from the euro. So the euro has gone down a little bit, but in reality, it didn't really suffer too much. And now you mentioned that Poland and the other countries which are candidates for eventually entering the euro. Don't you see any risk for these countries, now that we are seeing what are the gap in competitiveness, especially when you have countries with high productivity towards countries with low productivity, Germany versus Southern Europe, that eventually this euro could be a too tight jacket for countries which I guess expect to continue growing relatively above the average of the, let's say, old members of the euro area. And the second question is about, I think you already partly answered, I understand this argument about we need to stay in the euro and the European Union to avoid, to repeat what happened in the past. And I consider this is a very good argument, but I really wonder, in the mindset of people who are 25 years old or who are born in the 80s, in the 90s, probably this is something very far away in their mindset. And what they actually see is the lack of job opportunities, the lack of not being able to set up a family. In other words, maybe we need a much more radical revision of the vision of Europe, of what Europe wants to be in the next 20 years, and not just we need to stay in because actually staying out is worse, because I don't think this is enough to make the jump required. So, and I think you share that view from your words.
I will start with the second question because I fully share your opinion. You know, especially towards young generation, we cannot use all these historical arguments because everything positive what happened in Europe is absolutely obvious for a new generation. That is a fact. You know, open borders. You can study where you want. You know, that's happened. You know, that is not an inspiring idea now. So, in my opinion, this inspiring idea can be this project of this position of Europe in the global world, because that is something what we Europeans we should understand and participate in this very, very strong competition which we have. And of course, I absolutely agree with you that if we will not overcome the crisis soon, we can have a big problem, because unemployment not only among young people, the European problem is even more complicated, because we have not only unemployment among young generation as such, we have unemployment among well-educated, extremely high-educated young generation. We have problems with people graduating the good universities. And of course, they are enough educated, clever, and strong to organize something what can be politically a big problem for the future. So it's in this element I share your opinion, and of course, you know, this is funny when in some European debates you have representatives from Poland, because we are speaking about Europe with such optimism, and then the natural question is how you are so optimistic. And my answer is very simple, you know, because if you listen to people from Germany, Italy, France, after 50 or 60 years in the European Union, they are speaking with some fatigue, because this is a typical example of middle-age crisis. You know, all these guys, all these women and men, they are very tired because of the 6 years. Poland is 9 years in the European Union, and we are still in love. Maybe this is a little bit naive love, but still that is a very emotional position, which in my opinion can create some positive values, some positive things. Well, and that is, you know, that's because that is something quite important. We need, I think, especially vis-à-vis youngsters in Europe, we have stronger pro-European leadership, and we need, I don't know what it is, and we need more dialogue. We need better communication. Because speaking about a lot of successes of European integration, I have to tell you that one problem is existing and is quite serious, is a lack of this good communication, or this so-called deficit of democracy. We have quite developed European institutions, but the legitimization of these institutions is quite poor. We have a strong European Parliament, and the role of European Parliament will increase, but the turnout, the participation in European election in Europe is something around 25 to 30%. And that is a problem. But of course, it's possible to solve it. That is not the problem which is too heavy for us politicians to do something with that. And then question number one, Eurozone and new members. Of course, such risk exists, because for our competitiveness now and for our development, maybe the situation when we are not in the Eurozone, of course, during the crisis it was fantastic, but frankly speaking, Poland is not in Eurozone now, not because our fantastic strategy or wisdom of our politicians, but only by chance. Because the crisis came earlier and our negotiations with about Eurozone were postponed because of the crisis. And of course, I agree with you that its participation of new members will, especially for us domestically, will give some risks, but we have still time to be prepared for that. But politically, and I'm much more politician as Minister of Finance, in my opinion, for us, it's extremely important to be part of Eurozone, because when we speak about this Europe of two speeds, and we speak about the future of Europe, in my opinion, for such country as Poland, 40 million people, the only chance to use our political arguments and political weight is, even with accepting some risk, to be part of Eurozone and to be inside. Because for Poland to stay on the peripheries is politically wrong, and I think in the long term, economically very unuseful also.
Okay, let's, any questions from the floor, please identify yourself. Yes, sir.
Кенжеблат Мадьяр, Институт экономических исследований, Казахстан. Господин Маркузан уже примерно задал тот вопрос, который я хотел задать, но я хотел бы уточнить вот у господина Квасневского. Во-первых, большое спасибо за ваш доклад. Но я хотел конкретно, то есть вопрос о фискальном союзе и еврозоне. То есть, если так посмотреть, то основной проблемой Европейского Союза, то есть еврозоны в частности, является, что там ведется единая монетарная политика, при этом фискальная политика в каждой стране разная. И, то есть это несоответствие явилась одной из главных причин этого кризиса. Поэтому, например, вот я хотел бы спросить, конкретно Польша могла бы, ну, соответственно, там, вот если референдум провести, чтобы, там, например, Брюссель вмешивался в ее вот фискальные дела там, и так далее. И по другим странам как. Затем вот вопрос о том, то есть вы сами отметили, что действительно 27-28 стран сейчас, и у каждого своя позиция, поэтому это как бы вот, ну, из-за этого снижается эффективность принятия решений и так далее. С этим как вообще бороться? Ну, конкретные вещи. Спасибо.
Отвечу на русском языке, если разрешите меня. Первое, надо понять, я извиняюсь, что буду говорить спиной к вам, потому что здесь микрофон. I'm so sorry that I will speak in such very uncomfortable position to my interlocutor. In Russian. Well, первое, что надо понять, это идея Европейского Союза с самого начала была идеей эволюционного развития. Это никогда не было, вы знаете, здесь в Казахстане лучше. Я тоже знаю, потому что мы прожили свое время в Польской Народной Республике, и мы знаем, что это был Советский Союз. И главная разница между... я тоже знаю, как много друзей в России говорит, распался Советский Союз, наверное, и распадется Европейский Союз, потому что все союзы не имеют будущего. Но надо понять, что Европейский Союз никогда не был организован так, как Советский Союз. Это не было одной идеологии, которую надо было принять всем, и тогда реализовать эту идеологию, несмотря на разные условия. Европейский Союз с самого начала развивается эволюционным путем. Это обозначает, он начался с 6 стран, потом было 12, потом было 15, потом 25, 27, сегодня уже 28, по-моему, будет больше. И, конечно, тоже все европейские институты, все европейские процедуры, все европейские политики, они тоже развиваются постепенно. И это, конечно, и хорошо, и плохо. Хорошо, потому что эволюция помогает людям подготовиться к этому. Эволюция помогает, что мы отвечаем на вопросы так, как надо, как мы это чувствуем сегодня. Но, конечно, плохо, потому что, конечно, во время кризиса принять решение гораздо сложнее, чем для очень централизованной страны или централизованного союза. Потому что надо выслушать 28 стран, 28 премьер-министров и так далее, и так далее. Но кризис не будет всегда. Мы во время кризиса, конечно, теряем немножко время. И, может быть, мы не решаем вопросов так эффективно, как это было бы надо. Но после кризиса, я думаю, эта демократическая структура и это эволюционное развитие, она будет всем нам помогать, потому что она дает такое преимущество, что мы, как мы добиваемся какого-то этапа развития, это уже для всех так. Это, мы уже все понимаем, что так надо. Что нет уже сомнений, что вот они делают так, мы не хотим этого делать, но они нас там, конечно, давят или что-нибудь и так далее. Так я думаю, что Европейский Союз понял уже, например, что касается фискальной политики, что нам надо не только говорить о этой политике, но надо тоже контролировать, как мы это делаем. Потому что это неправда, что еврозона, ей создали еврозону без этих критерий, которые надо использовать. Были очень известные критерии Maastricht, инфляция, долг, дефицит. Но, конечно, первое, Греция никогда не исполнила эти критерии, другие страны частично. Но, конец концов, то же самое и главные страны Европы, как Германия и Франция, тоже не исполняли эти критерии. И теперь мы уже поняли после этого 12 лет еврозоны, что, конечно, все эти элементы, которые мы приняли, надо исполнять, потому без этого не будет успеха, не будет дальшего развития. Я думаю, что этот урок кризиса, он тоже важный для Европы. Европейский Союз, скажу вам так, у него есть такой талант, что после всех кризисов, я все-таки еще не говорю об этом кризисе, но эти кризисы, которые мы уже прожили, он был сильнее, а не слабее, он имел свою силу развиваться дальше. Я надеюсь, что тоже так будет с этим кризисом. И последнее, что касается Польши. Конечно, мы понимаем прекрасно, что если будем вступать в еврозону, это не обозначает только, что мы принимаем евро как нашу валюту, но это обозначает, что мы должны исполнить все критерии, которые связаны с фискальной дисциплиной и с фискальным пактом. И мы уже подписали, вы знаете, Польша не член еврозоны, но мы уже фискальный договор подписали как страна, которая думает, что в будущем будет там. Найти, это как в жизни, найти этот баланс между, конечно, тем, что надо делать, и такой сильной внутренней контроля, это, конечно, задача. Это задача для Европейского Союза. И думаю, что после этого кризиса мы будем умнее и это сделаем.